Military Science Section Podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military Science Section Podcast.
Welcome to the show. Today you have just got Jeff and I again, which was everybody's favorite show. Go figure. The last time we had a chance just to talk. But schedule's getting in the way and whatnot. Rick is in Yellowstone again,
Whoville.
I think.
No, he's not in
Whoville.
Yellowstone. He's in Whoville taking
Whoville.
pictures of owls.
That's right.
I don't know where he's in Wisconsin, I think.
He has taken some amazing pictures of owls. I
Yes.
think he posts those on Instagram, maybe. He puts them on Facebook too, I think. But if you haven't seen Rick's nature photography, it is amazing. And then Josh is off.
Disgusting that he
Yeah.
does write so well and so fast and takes amazing pictures.
Well, I'm glad when he does photography because it seems like he's actually relaxing, so that's good. And then Josh is off fighting the good fight, doing some extra work this week as well. So let's see. Today we are talking about a couple different things. We wanted to talk about what makes a great MILSF cover and what has been like a cover that resonates with us, but also in the things that we've learned resonate with the market. And Jeff's got some special insight into that also because he is married to an amazing cover artist. And then after that, we wanted to talk about a question that came up in the group of why we don't see more stories related to side characters or kind of niche jobs in MILSF and things like, of that nature, which depending on, not all of us were trigger pullers. That's the nature of the military. So I think we all love those kind of stories, but we also have to sell the stories. So that'll be an interesting thing to talk about, which hopefully will spawn some more conversation too in the different groups we've got between the Facebook and the Discord. So, all right, let's talk about covers. Jeff, I know you have a lot to say about this. So why don't you kick things off and maybe start with some of your favorite covers?
Well, first of all, I'm married to Rebecca Haskell, obviously. And she runs a website called vividcovers.com, which there'll be a link in the comments or down below. You've infected me, James.
I know.
I don't normally do ums, but you're like, I need to say less ums, and now I'm umming.
Now you're thinking about the ummings. And I'm doing this.
Again. Rebecca has been doing cover design since 2012. She actually started doing cover design before I started my writing career. And she does paintings, she does photo bashing, she does all this stuff. So I've learned a lot about covers from her. She's spoken at Author Nation before it was Author Nation when it was 20 books. She's spoken at Inkers and a few other places. And you can see a lot of her videos of her speaking about covers online. And she famously says something that it makes total sense. And if you're an author and you're interested in being an indie published author or going through a small press, you need to have control of your covers because there are three kinds of people in the world. People who don't know what good art is, but think they know. People who know they don't know, and people who know they know. And the vast majority of people are people who don't know what makes a good cover, but think that they do. And that is a problem. A cover has one goal, and that goal is to get the person to click on the button, read the blurb so that they buy the book. That is the sole goal of the cover. And to do that, it has 3 seconds to explain to the viewer what genre this is and really broad strokes about the story. So when it comes to military sci-fi, if there is a ship on the cover, like what's behind James on the screen, then you know it's military sci-fi, it's in space. That's all you need to know. Doesn't need to know anything else. When you look at, like, this is one of the covers from my Arsenal Full Metal Superhero series. Clearly, it's some sort of armored superhero. Obviously, you're going to be looking in the superhero category, so that's going to be pretty easy. And it says Full Metal Superhero on the book. You can't leave that sort of thing up to chance. So covers are really, really important, especially in mil sci-fi. Now, I forget who. No, I don't forget. Mal Cooper coined the term Starship Butt on covers, and it's true. It's just like you see this giant flaming nozzle coming out of the back of a ship, and it just looks cool. And there are a lot of examples of covers. Tom Edwards does amazing ship covers. He actually kind of pioneered military sci-fi covers back in the day in 2015, 2016, when Chris Fox and all those guys were writing military sci-fi. They would go to Tom Edwards for their covers. Rebecca does a lot of them for Athon. So if you see, like, if you've seen my covers, then you go to Athon's catalog and you'll see other covers that have similar styles to them. You'll know which ones are hers and which ones aren't. But she does all mine. And my absolute favorite cover, if you can share the screen,
Yeah, let me
I should have pulled this up when we started talking.
let's see.
My favorite cover is Grimm's War Book 3. That's just my favorite cover. It is so cool. But all my covers are great. They all have the interceptor on them. And when Becky and I sat down to look at the ship or look at the design the cover, we talked about it because it was really important. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. It was really important that when people look at the book, not only do they know it's military sci-fi, but they see the shark nose and they know that the ship is something special. And that was important to me. Now, would it have sold just as well without the shark nose? Probably. But for those who grew up, like I grew up reading like the Seawolf, or watching the Seawolf for other, the P-40 Flying Tigers and stuff like that, it would signify something. It's like shorthand, it's like code.
Right. And that's one thing I wanted to mention was that it can be one thing to catch someone's attention. And the question would be like, well, why don't we just put, naked people on every cover? Well, we're trying to communicate that those 3 seconds, you're trying to communicate to a specific kind of reader because you're making that promise, you're attracting that specific kind of reader who then goes to the blurb, is this a thing I like? And then ultimately gets all the way through the book and likes it because it fulfills the promise that started with the cover. And Jeff, if you could show that again real quick, I wanted to like point out a couple things that I think Rebecca did and you guys probably talked about, but I think the shark nose is a big piece of that. That's going to speak to a reader that loves World War II, probably loves dogfights, loves that feeling of honor and history, and that comes from those notes. But then also, like I see Starship Yamamoto in it. I also see Robotech and
The SDF-1.
the SDF-1. So there's a lot of things there. There's also a lot of action. If you look at the cover only has like basically one specific thing in the foreground, which some folks might tell you that needs to be a face or a person in action in some way. In this case, we're trying to attract a reader that loves space and military science fiction, but something is happening. Like there's tension in the cover. I can see that, okay, we've got a ship trying to get away from some kind of attack, and I want to know what's happening. Like the cover asks a question and it's not necessarily like one thing people think quite often is that it needs to tell something from the book itself, or it needs to reflect some major thing that you had happen in the story. And that's not the case. And often, if you start there or give that to the artist, they're going to not give you something that is related to getting a person to stay on the store, stay on the book and read the blurb. So, more like these are the things I want in the ship. I want it to catch the reader's eye. It's got some really cool light effects. The title is really easy to read. That's another piece. Jeff, as the author, is easy to read as well. So, there's good contrast in the typography, which is another thing I know Rebecca spends a lot of time on. And other folks at Athon do too. So
To be
sometimes,
fair, Steve
yeah.
Bollier did the
Did he do this?
typography on
Okay, I was gonna
these.
say sometimes I know Steve does it. Sometimes Rebecca does.
But yeah, he's a fantastic typographer. He does a really good job. He has done an amazing job with the whole series throughout, being very consistent. And all those things you said, those aren't all things you consciously think about. They're things that pop in those 3 seconds. They're all feelings you get when you look at the cover of any book. And it's the difference between a book cover that you look at and go, oh, hey, I want to know more, and a book cover that you just swipe up on.
Well, I would say it's the difference between an experienced book design cover designer that knows what attracts the eye and attracts the specific kind of reader. Because I know in talking with Rebecca in particular and hearing her talks, she knows genre very well. And so the type of cover that's going to attract someone in Billionaire Shifter Romance, I don't think she does those covers, but you
She
know what
does
I'm
not.
saying? Like where I've learned a lot of these lessons was actually in romance, where the type of tie a person has, or if they've got tattoos or not, like all these things are saying
You got
specific.
tattoos, you're a bad boy, you
Yeah,
know.
bad boy billionaire, tattoos in a suit. Um, it's
Yeah.
it's pretty wild, but the market,
Covers
like,
are their own language. They
yes.
really are. And you have to be able to speak that language. And you have to understand that there's a huge difference between indie covers. And yes, I'm published by Athon. Athon is one of the biggest publishers in the world at this point, but they're still considered indie because they don't publish into bookstores. So we'll just use that as a frame of reference. There's a big difference between covers for my books and covers for David Weber or John Ringo or any of the other traditionally published mill sci-fi guys. They don't sell to readers. And I know you're going to hear that and you're going to be like, well, what do you mean they don't sell to readers? They sell to editors, and their editors sell to their publisher, and the publisher sells to the bookstore. So no point in any of that process. My chair is falling off, sliding off the thing. No, at no point in any of that process is a reader looking at the cover going, wow, I want to read this book. Not even when it's in the bookstore, because in the bookstore, it's all going to be spine out.
And in the bookstore, they're a captive audience. Like the
Yeah,
bookstore, Barnes and Noble at this point, we shouldn't even say bookstore because it's just Barnes and
it's
Noble.
just Barnes and Noble.
There might
Yeah.
be a few very small, niche books that are buying, like making buys through distributors, but primarily it's Barnes and Noble. But their whole thing is they're attract once they've got someone in the door, now it's their job to attract people. Like just the fact that the physical book is there often will lead to that buying decision. Like somebody walks into Barnes and Noble about as warm as they're going to get to make that buying decision. Whereas Amazon has created, I mean, we can all complain, we could have a whole other episode complaining about Amazon, but Amazon has created an ecosystem where either through the device, like on your phone in the Kindle app, or the Kindle Reader, or a Kindle Fire, or just coming to through the web and semantic search on the web and getting a person to that. Now you've got a screen full of the top 100 military sci-fi books, or maybe it's sci-fi, and you don't quite even like. Now you're going to drill down into the category, and the reader doesn't realize that Amazon divides these things by categories. But once you're in that screen, now you can see all these books that are supposed to be military science fiction. And one of the things to complain about Amazon about, I don't want to get into it, but they categorize books in certain ways, which they seem to be getting away from this. It might be more AI driven based on content, but they have categories, right? And so you might have a category that is says it's military science fiction, but the book is obviously not when you look
Not.
at the cover. But that book may rise to the top just because of some element of the cover or something about it is attractive to an audience. And we always like it's a very interesting topic of conversation to try and figure out what it is about this book that brought it to the top when another book that seems to have all the elements isn't quite there.
And there's,
Sometimes,
obviously an element of luck
yeah.
involved.
And
But
the
my belief has always been that you control what you can control and
right.
you don't worry about what you can't. And you want to take all the things that can work for you and maximize those things instead of letting them be um, against you. So if your thought is, oh, it's just luck, I don't need a good cover, well, you're hurting yourself. You need a
Right.
good cover. Does
You're just
every
leaving money
book
on the
that
table.
succeeds have a good cover? No. We look at them all the time and say, how is anybody buying that book? We were just doing that the other day in our Discord. There was some book with just the crappiest cover and it had 6,000 reviews or something. So you have to understand though that as a writer, one, you don't have control over everything, but you do have control over your story and you do have control over your audience. And you have to know who your audience is when you're writing. And who your audience is will determine your cover. And if you're with a good publisher like Athon, then they'll know what makes a good cover and you don't have to worry about it. If you don't know what makes a good cover, that's actually pretty fantastic. If you think you know what makes a good cover and everybody's telling you that's not a good cover, then you may not actually know what a good cover is. So just bear that in mind.
And I would say what we're doing right now kind of demonstrates we love to talk to people about covers. So I would say reach out and ask people. But
Yeah.
where I was going to with that thing on Amazon is covers are there's just a lot of competition. Some things change over time, but MILSF is one genre where they don't change as much. But you've got a really great tool to see what, for the most part, the readers want, because the readers are choosing the books. And you'll see it in the reviews. Like you might have a book with a cover that you think is, oh, that's a really cool cover, but then it's a 2.5 star book, which may or may not mean anything. But you go and read the reviews, and you get like themes of what people may not, how that book maybe didn't fulfill the promise of what its cover and blurb had, had in there for the reader. But Amazon is such an amazing tool to study these things and see what interests you. Like ask yourself as a reader, like what excites me about that story, what intrigues me, what makes me stop and look at it and then think I want to read that. For me, the only other thing that is more powerful than this is a recommendation. Like I just bought a book that the cover was like pretty meh, but somebody recommended it and said it was interesting in MILSF, and so I was like, cool, I'll check it out. um
Was that
because,
that incense
yeah,
punk?
yeah. Well, it was basically like future Vatican sends like holy knights off to do something. It's like, okay, I'll check that out. Um,
I didn't even know
that's
that was a thing until I looked it up.
I didn't know. So it's a whole subgenre kind of
Yeah,
thing.
incense punk. It's religious orders in space, military religious orders in space.
Okay, is it kind of like a Warhammer 40K type thing,
I
or?
don't know. The amount of information I got was religious military orders in space. So,
All right,
the Vatican had a navy and used it in space.
I'm gonna learn some things.
So
Um,
I thought that was pretty interesting. The problem with a super that's even more niche than what we already write in is that you're going to run into an audience size problem. Now, I used to write superheroes, and my superhero books sold better than anybody else's superhero books when they came out because they're really good. And I love superheroes, which is a key to writing in any genre, is that you love it. But there just weren't that many superhero novels, and there were even fewer readers. And so after 3 years of writing in superheroes, I realized that I had reached basically all the readers who were really interested in reading about superheroes. And in order to increase my take home, basically, I had to find a genre that was bigger. And I always wanted to write military sci-fi anyways. The goal was always to write military sci-fi. And military sci-fi is a huge genre compared to superheroes. But within mil sci-fi, there are really niche subgenres. Not everybody in mil sci-fi. I would hazard to guess that maybe 10% of people in mil sci-fi are interested in reading about Vatican Navy and space. But if you have another job, if you have a day job and you like writing something niche like that, then it's completely viable. Just make
Mhm.
sure your cover communicates that.
Right. And in some ways, like I'm a military science fiction reader. If I see something that is, I don't know, for me, like I want the story, like I'm interested in reading about that subject. I don't want to be preached to necessarily. So that would be a thing, like who are you trying to communicate to?
Mhm.
So that would be, and that's one of the things about MILSF. I feel like it has broad, I won't say, well, I shouldn't say broad crossover appeal, but I feel that there are enough readers that would come from, space
Regular
opera.
mil SF. Yeah.
Yeah, that love adventure, love like they've had a taste of it. As long as you've got great characters, they'll overlook those things. Unless they're, a really diehard space opera reader, I guess. Um, but I don't know. These are all the things to think about, and trying to have control over this is hard, depending on the publisher. If you were one of those few people that still ends up with a what's considered a trad contract now, in a lot of cases, you may have to get your own cover or pay for it, or I don't, it's so weird right now.
Well, I know people who are traditionally published either through Bain or through Tor. Uh, I don't think I know any Simon Schuster. I don't think I know
Mhm.
anybody from Penguin, but their covers are trash, and
Yeah.
it's hard to tell. You don't want everyone to tell someone that, obviously, especially if they're already traditionally published and they're already successful. But it is when they're moving in the indie sphere, it's kind of like you have to tiptoe around it and say, "Hey, listen, I know you did really well in traditional publishing, and you had these covers that my 6-year-old could do in Photoshop, but that's because you have a captive audience.
Right.
The bookstore bought your books. Readers didn't buy your books. Now,
And also
eventually,
they
readers
can't
do
they
buy
can't
your books,
control it.
but you know what I mean? Like the bookstore isn't looking at covers when they're making their decision about buying a book.
Mhm.
And on Amazon, all you have is your cover and your blurb and your first page. It is the entirety of your sales pitch. And if you have a trashy cover, your 1/3 of your sales pitch is terrible.
There
You've
are
got
weird, I will say that that story we're looking at about the engineer that went back to the past or something, like for me, that cover actually maybe works for that genre because I can tell an engineer made that cover. So okay, I'll look at that because that's so weird and off genre that I'll look at it. But
if I had to hazard a guess, I would say he kind of he brought fans over from somewhere else. Like Andy Weir did. You know, Andy Weir brought all his fans from his BBS to buy The Martian.
Mhm.
Larry Correia did that with Monster Hunter.
Yeah.
All of his fans that he built over the years, posting his stories on BBSs about hunting monsters with guns, came and bought his books. Because that engineer story is so niche. It is similar to Portal Fantasy, but it was back in time.
Mhm.
And it's actually kind of an interesting concept, but it is so niche that I can't imagine that there are the tens of thousands of readers required to leave 3,000 reviews on his series. So at that point, like, does the cover matter as much?
Right.
No. But if you've already got tens of thousands of fans, then why are you watching our podcast?
Well, and the last time I looked at Royal Road, like I don't feel like art was a big part of anything. You could add a cover, but it was not what hooked people into the story. Like it was the story and how fast you can deliver it.
Yeah. And it's really I've talked to a number of authors and content creators on Royal Road who say that the 3 sections a week, each between 2 and 4,000 words, is how you get your audience. And while we write 2 to 3,000 words a day, I wouldn't be comfortable putting up, 10,000 words a week on a website because that wouldn't have time to edit them. I wouldn't have time to refine them. And also, when you're talking about those genres that go to Royal Road, which is mainly lit RPG and isekai or isekai, whatever you call it, Portal Fantasy,
Mhm.
and progression fantasy, it's a different genre with different expectations and different readers, and I don't write that. I
Right.
probably could, but I'm also a big believer in writing what you love, and there's a way to find the genre that you can make money in and still love doing it.
Mhm.
You know, so it's important to not try to recreate the wheel. I had a friend who wrote fantasy and he really poo-pooed fantasy. He didn't like epic fantasy. And I'm like, why are you writing it? And he wanted to make it better. He wanted to write, a thinking man's epic fantasy. He didn't do very well because the people who read that genre already like the genre. They
Right.
don't need you coming in and changing everything. Think about the reaction everybody had to Last Jedi. They don't need you coming in and changing everything and subverting their expectations because you don't like it. They already like it. So when you're writing military sci-fi, you're writing to people who already like military sci-fi. So if you haven't read military sci-fi or you don't know what it is, then maybe not write in it.
Subverting expectations often is code for I have contempt for this and wish it was more like something else. So, or I got handed this gig and I have to make the best of it, I guess. But that might be a good transition to, okay, why don't we write stories about the cook? We love the cook, but why don't we have a whole trilogy, a whole 300,000 words devoted to the epic story of a cook on a starship and how he wins the Golden Ladle Award at the end of book one and then progresses to becoming head of the DFAC by book two.
Yeah,
That's
that's a
cool.
great idea.
I
I'm on that.
I
Let me show you a great book that is mill sci-fi, but it is off the main genre. So in mill sci-fi, there are your two main genres are space fleet and space marine. And by saying I mean genre, I mean categories on Amazon, right? You got space fleet, which is what I write, and space marine, which is what Rick writes. And it's pretty self-explanatory. If the main action takes place on a fleet, fleet level with ships, you're space fleet. If the main action's on the ground, you're space marine. Even if they're not marines, they could be army or air force or whatever. Most people reading Mill Sci-Fi are coming in looking for one of those two things. However, when I talk to writers at conventions and locally, I always tell them like, hey, if you have a personal experience with something that's different than both of those and you're passionate about it, there's room in the genre for more. I never met anybody who's passionate about being a cook in the Navy. And also, while you could obviously write a story about a cook in the Navy, you would at some point have to have the cook pick up a rifle and shoot people because otherwise there's no action. And part of our genre is action. It's action adventure. People want to see combat. They want to see, they want to see the violence. They want to see the repercussions. They want to see, I say see, but they want to read about it. And so there's this great book by Kevin Eikenberry called Steel on Target. And I am proud to say that I was one of the people who convinced him to write it. And Kevin was a 30-year tanker in the U.S. Army. And he wasn't considering writing middle sci-fi because he thought there was just Space Marine and Space Fleet. And I spent a couple of nights talking to him about it, how there is room in the genre for more if where you're coming from is very authentic. So if you were, say, a helicopter pilot and you wanted to write a middle sci-fi, something about a helicopter pilot. By the way, pick up Steel on Target. It's really well written, and it's a great middle sci-fi about tankers versus alien buzzards. It's pretty awesome. If you wanted to write something like a helicopter pilot, then all you have to do is craft a way to have those similar experiences in space.
Mm-hmm.
And people will want to read it. They really will. What they don't want to read, though, is boring stories, which is where you get into like your problem with writing about a cook or writing about the motor pool or whatever. And you could make those stories exciting, and you probably could carry a whole 100,000 novel on them, but it would definitely be something where that's something that you did and were really passionate about. So it's not like you can't do it. It's that very few people can already very few people can write a book. And even fewer people can write a military sci-fi novel. And even fewer still can write something other than Space Fleet or Marines. So you're really narrowing down your target there.
I mean, I love to see that an author just understands the importance of those things. Like I love the cooks in Grimm's War. I love side
Josh
characters.
Mendez.
I really enjoy it when Rick will, add other characters, and Josh writes from almost a the Valor series has a little bit of a law enforcement flavor, even though it's military, law enforcement in a lot of ways. And like my friend Will Crudge, who also writes MILSF, was just retired from air defense, like me, and we're always kind of talking about how can we get more air defense in there. And it's hard because what I find is that I think understanding red air, understanding how to read terrain from an air attack perspective, understanding the concepts of air defense can make other aspects of that story really interesting, especially since so few people actually have any kind of red air coming on a ground force in a meaningful way. I find that really interesting. But it's like Jeff is saying, it's hard to make that the center of the story, especially because, at least in the Army, like air defense, we might be a battlefield multiplier and defend, whole countries, but not many people were in air defense. Like it's just such a small piece of the military experience as a whole. Like a lot of people might have been cooks, but even then, I don't know, do the cooks want to read about cooks? So I don't know. I love those. For me, it comes
Well, they
back.
want to read about the cook if the cook is the guy from Under Siege.
Yeah, I mean, the cook's doing
Navy
something
SEAL,
cool. Like,
he's just a cook,
I mean, I knew a guy that had a pretty major F up while he was in, and he had to reclass, and he became a cook. And so for me, I've always thought of like an origin story like that, where somebody did something. I mean, maybe almost like Jacob experienced in Grimm's War, and now he's a cook who needs to overcome that.
There was
But
a great story out of Afghanistan about a cook who had gone just out of his way to get strawberries for his unit.
Mhm.
And they were in FOB, and he was going to make strawberry shortcake for everybody. And it's a big deal. I forget, it was like, if I forget it was for a holiday or whatever, and they came under mortar attack and the strawberries got destroyed.
Oh man.
He got so pissed, he jumped up on the 50 cal and just went to town. And racked up a bunch of bodies and defended the FOB. That's a story that's interesting to tell, and it would be from the cook's perspective, but it
Hmm.
wouldn't be about cooking. And that's what it really comes down to is you got to tell a story that has tension and action and mystery and a little bit of romance and all this other stuff. And is it really military sci-fi if there's no military action involved? It doesn't have to be a war, but I mean, you know, so you could tell it from the cook's perspective. It just wouldn't be about him being a cook.
Right.
You know what I mean? However, you could tell a story about air defense people, and it would be from their defense perspective, and it would be about air defense. Or you could tell people a story about mechanized, like you're doing with your story you're spinning off of Grimm's War. They're a Mudcat mechanized infantry unit, right? And that's very similar to air defense. They have vehicles, they've got weapons mounted on the vehicles, and a lot of your time you spend in the sandbox is going to translate really well into that story. Whereas all the time I spent watching and reading about ships in space and on the Navy, helps me, craft a story that makes people feel like they're there.
Hmm.
I actually feel like it's probably harder to do for you than for me because I wasn't in the Navy, so I can read about it and I can watch about it when I do, and I can interview people. But there are things about having been in Afghanistan and Iraq where I wasn't that would be impossible to replicate without having actually been there.
When I was, yeah, I don't want to act like I did not go to Afghanistan and Iraq. I went everywhere around there.
Well, you went
But
to the Middle East. The
yeah,
Middle East. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. Didn't mean to
I no, I
pigeonhole
got
you
to
there.
go pretty much every adjacent country to Iraq. I guess
You were in
except for
Saudi
Jordan,
Arabia, right?
except for Jordan, Saudi, Kuwait, Turkey, and
Yeah.
Israel. Um, and
I
we,
don't mean to offend anybody from the Middle East, but
yeah,
it is one big desert. So
I just don't want to act like I
terrain-wise,
was in a place where I wasn't. But it
no, no, I get you.
so much of what my experience as a leader, like the deployment and the getting ready for deployment was the good stuff. It was the stuff that the thing I have a difficult time not writing about was all the this like social welfare stuff I had to do, like, making soldiers feed their families and, making a guy pay child support and dealing with just
Nobody wants to
so
read about that crap.
nobody wants to read about that. But that's
Yeah,
like the reality of the stuff that you're like, no, 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 don't think about that. Don't have him think about that. It's not, even though that was a big part of, nobody tells that's the
yeah.
stuff you got to worry about. So I'm trying to think of some other side type characters that we do love to read about. Like you mentioned pilots. I love to read about pilots. I think, we've talked before about a character's ability to do double duty. So if you've got, I think, a niche job, like say a warrant officer or, like a battalion BMO, I've got a character that's the BMO. And so that gives some insight into the Mudcats from the overall perspective. And if that person is kind of fun and, you like to hear from them anyway, it's a cool way to do double duty on something.
I
So
know you had the experience where you didn't like your commo guy in the truck with you because you didn't
oh
like your
yeah,
commo guy, I guess.
well I mean, one of the things like Singars just never worked. Like it was always I mean, I was pretty good at, this is going to date me, but you used an ANCD, right?
I went from the PRCs to the Singars.
Okay, so
I
what
was the
like
31 kilos that trained people on Singars.
so like loading codes into a Singar
Hmm.
was, yeah. So trying to get comms was always just it felt like you could give an hour for this. And anytime I'd watch the convoy brief and they would say like, we're going to load radios and roll out in 15 minutes. I'm like, you're high. That just does not happen that fast.
Did
None
you
of
guys
it.
not have a dedicated commo unit with you?
We had one, like per battery, we had one person.
One
Um,
person.
yeah.
You
I mean,
didn't have
we're
a
just
combo
staff.
truck.
Well, we had, so no, and Patriot was kind of special. Patriot special. Patriot had UHF communication between firing batteries because
All right.
it fights as a battalion. But those 31 Romeos at the time only did UHF. They really weren't good with Singars, and so you could put them on doing that, but they weren't any better than me. And like once I,
That was 10 years after I was in, and my entire job as a 31 kilo, 31 uniform was training people how to use Singars.
yeah.
And you're saying 10 years later in 2003, people still didn't know how to use them?
Well, we didn't have the people. The problem was getting the ANCD to work, like to get a good handshake between the ANCD and the Singar. And you would have all kinds of voodoo with the cable's bad, shake the ANCD, reboot it. Like you lost codes. the Singar won't, the port's bad, like all this stuff, so you're carrying around like my LBV, I always had a pencil with an eraser so I could clean, the
The port out.
contacts. And then, oh no, I did it too much. There's too much rubber in there. Okay, blow on it. Okay. Like all this stuff you try and do, and you're moving down the convoy trying to do this. So if I had my driver as the radio guy, who was also the radio guy, I'm kind of wasting two resources because not to toot my own horn, but I could do that. I got trained on it. So I would hit like my part of the convoy and then break people up to do other parts so we could get it done. If I just had one person doing it, like, and they do it like if we tried to do it the night before, technically we weren't supposed to let the radio sit with codes in them. So there was just a lot of things there that,
That's crazy. Every combo shop I was a part of, well, every unit I was a part of had its own combo shop,
yeah,
which was usually a sergeant, a couple of specialists, and 4 or 5 privates who all knew how to use the radios. And inevitably, one of them, usually me, was the battalion, was the company commander driver. I drive the company commander because he didn't want to know how to use the radios. He just wanted them to work. And so it's crazy. You guys had an air defense unit with Patriots and Humvees, and you didn't have a dedicated combo truck with a crew on it.
we had a CP. So that was like an ancient deuce and a half with a hard shell in the back. And I'm remembering back, so I'm kind of dividing up things I would do as a platoon leader versus where the battery commander was. And we had an E6 at the time in that unit that he did sometimes end up being the driver for that deuce and a half. Like that wasn't ideal, but he would be there for the battery commander, me as the convoy commander, which is kind of what I'm writing from the perspective of for Grim in this situation. Um, just didn't have those. Like you were lucky to have maybe one
I want
specialist
to
that
point out
might,
to our audience that whenever you hear military grade, James keeps saying, talking about a deuce and a half. The last deuce and a half rolled off the assembly line before I was born.
right.
So they were the main vehicle, truck wise, for transportation in the Vietnam War. That's military grade.
Yeah. And the thing was, if they took it away, there was no replacement. So we were always like, make this thing work, make it work. It was a 3-speed, if I remember right. So you're sitting on top of this thing trying to goose it and keep it alive. And if you were
Yeah.
trying to get over a berm, and like you'd be good in first, but if you tried to go to second, like technically, it was just a whole that
My neighbor here in Utah has a deuce and a half,
yeah.
camouflage painting, U.S. Army plates, sitting in. He drives it to work every day. It's crazy.
Uh-huh.
When we moved here, the first time he started it up and I could smell the diesel, I was just like total flashbacks to the motor pool. See, I always drove around in a Humvee that had 4 giant antennas on it for UHF, VHF, Singars. PRCs are still being used at the time. And my whole job was training people how to use the Singars, going to hot trouble spots where they couldn't get them working, and making sure people were not transmitting in the open. Because what's the point of the Singar if you don't do that? If you do that, so that's crazy.
In
But that's
Germany,
the
we
military
had
for you.
yeah.
And I try really hard when I'm writing to put elements of that in there. Not everything works the way it's supposed to work. Not everything works at all. Sometimes you have equipment that just malfunctions. Like the story I'm currently working on in Grim Legacy, they have a refitted ship that they're working on, and they're at a gun range and they're firing the different turrets at this asteroid belt, and all these fault lights go off. And the engineering team is scrabbling because they're like, all the power relays have just blown along all of these turrets on this brand new ship. What is going on? And that's just the way the military is.
Right.
It's never going to change.
It's one of my gripes with like special operator stories because like while that stuff is fun and it's kind of a power fantasy, I just feel like that's so rarely how things actually go. Or it might
Well, then
go,
also you got to remember, like those guys get all the cool
they get all
toys.
the best
They get
stuff.
all the weapons.
There's
They
only
get everything
6
is
of them.
brand new. They
Yeah.
never go into the field with used gear. They have all the high tech stuff. In book Know Thy Enemy,
Right.
that's when I introduced Danny and his special forces unit. They go down to this planet and they've got polymer ruthenium cloaks that make them invisible. They've got special drones for recon. And the Marines are like, why don't we get this stuff? And in reality, that's actually true today. The Marine budget is $49 billion a year for the US Marine Corps. And they're the only military organization that passes their audit every year. They can tell you exactly where all those $49 billion is, and I promise you it's not in high-tech equipment. Whereas special forces units get all the toys. and all the brand new equipment.
And they're not
And
burning weeds in parking lots. So
yes, yeah,
yeah, that's one of the things that I love, like one of the details. And I always do appreciate a niche character that teaches me something about the military and someone, the author's experience or somebody they talk to, so that I just love to learn new things when it comes to there's always some new experience, or even like the story I'm telling about my unit. Yeah, and this was a unit in El Paso. Like the unit in Germany was different. Like we had different radio capabilities because of NATO, but it always varies. And I really try not to be any sort of like stickler or purist whenever it comes to anything, especially MTO, which would be, like how a unit is set up, because it just varies. And like what you're supposed to have is not what you do have. And as the author, I think that's where tension and conflict, I shouldn't even call it conflict, it's a constraint or an obstacle that in reality characters have to overcome, on their way to reach their goals. And I don't
yeah.
want it to be like annoying, I don't want them tripping over their feet all the time, but I love to see how a person in this situation responds to, what might be crap equipment that they're given.
It'd be really interesting is that like I've written about Mudcats, Corsairs, and the Marines on a very limited basis, right? And limited deployment actions. So like when the Marines deploy with the Raptor suits are working because I also, in the course of that book, make sure to show that there's at some point the Marines are doing maintenance on their equipment, which you do. So where you get to play with it, which is really interesting, is these Mudcats are sitting in the desert day after day, week after week. And I guarantee you at one point someone's going to go out there and they're going to start it, and somebody else from another company has come and taken some piece of equipment off of it that they needed that they couldn't get, and now your Mudcat won't start or something. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, because that's how it works.
Tactical requirement. And that's what it is. If you think people don't steal in the same company or platoon, that's really not cool. But whenever you had a battalion motor pool, like you had to watch out because other battery or company is fair game. But that's why, as a commander, you always do layouts on the same day. If they try and convince you to do it, oh, sir, we'll have this platoon layout on this day and this one on that day, and that way we're not here for 14 hours. Like, nope, everybody at once, because otherwise one wrench is just going to move between trucks.
One of the nice things about being a PFC, slash specialist while I was in was that I was usually the one doing the tactical reacquiring, and I enjoyed that immensely. Probably more than I should have. Didn't need two tires, PFC. But so it all brings this realism to it. So if you can bring if you have a character, say you were a radar operator in the Navy and you want to write a military sci-fi about a radar operator, you bring those elements that only you know. It's like my favorite question to ask anybody in the military. What is it about you did the military that no one could possibly know unless they did your job? And those are the elements that are exciting and interesting to readers. Readers want those things. They want to be taught stuff. And, it's really fascinating. Never ask a reader what they want because they won't be able to tell you. And if they do tell you, they'll tell you the wrong thing. People don't know what they want. You hear that all the time, and it is the honest truth. People think they know what they want, but they don't actually really know what they want. And if you don't believe me, ask your wife where she wants to have lunch. I apologize to our female viewers. People don't know what they want. And so your job as the author is to know what they want and give it to them. And they want interesting stories. They want interesting characters. They want good characters. And by good, I mean like morally good characters. They want people they can look up to. We all knew people in the Army and the military who sucked. No one wants to read about that crap. They lived it. No one wants to read about the guy who backstabs everybody every given opportunity. Nobody wants to read about the woman in the unit who cried sexual harassment every single time someone got near her. We lived it. We don't need that nonsense. It makes everybody look bad. So I always focus on like what were the good things about being in the military? What was the camaraderie, the sticking up for each other, the looking out for one another, working hard, all those great things. And so if you can bring that sort of idea to your niche, do it. At some point, your radar operator is going to have to pick up a rifle and shoot
Right.
or pilot or something. But that's what other characters are for too. So like in Grimm's War, you've got Jacob, who is the captain, and I've made it very clear that he is really good at being a captain. You know, he's a great leader, he's a great tactician. He constantly gets his butt kicked in hand-to-hand combat. He can't shoot for crap, which is painful for me to write because I'm an excellent marksman and I love shooting. But in one of the books, he tries to shoot something and he misses and he has to take a step closer and he shoots again and misses. And finally he's like, you know, to get it hit because nobody is good at everything. You know, everybody is very in the military, everybody is very mission specific in their training. We talk about how great special forces guys are, but you put them on a ship, what the hell are they going to do? They don't know how to run a ship, you know? And so you have somebody who is like a really excellent radar operator or sonar operator, or gravity in my case, for Grimm's War, then you have the opportunity to write something to both educate people and entertain them. And when you can do that, it is magic. People just love that.
I mean, one of my favorite, really the things that I felt most fulfilled in the military is when you take a unit and you give them a mission that might not quite be their mission, but they're going to go do that thing because they got ordered to do it. And they step up and make it happen and use the different skills that people have, you know, in addition to what they already know. That's just, you wish that like society was just made of these little building blocks. We would get so much stuff done. um, it was one
Yeah,
of the,
for
when I
sure.
left the army, like that was one of the biggest things that I missed was I didn't feel like I was part of a thing doing good
Do a
work.
thing, doing a thing.
Yeah,
You really they don't when you're getting out of the military, they call ETS and time service. They don't prepare you for how forlorn you're gonna feel, how without purpose and desire. It's just like I ended up spending 3 weeks playing video games in my sister's apartment because I just didn't know what to do with myself at that point. You know, because up until that point, you're like, this is your mission every day. You do this, 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 and this, and you see the results. And then you go into the civilian world, and it's like, all right, what are your qualifications, Mr. Haskell? Well, I can shoot somebody at 750 meters and probably get a headshot. Crickets,
probably,
you know.
probably.
Well, we don't really need that in the corporate world, sir. But
When the corpo wars come, you will
yeah,
be in high demand.
you'll be calling me. Yeah, that never happened. We all thought that was going to happen, but it never happened. So, going back to the niche characters, do it. Absolutely. Draw from your real life experience, but also draw from other fiction that you've read, other things that you've consumed, and craft a story that's both interesting and educational and exciting. And if you can do all of that and have that niche character be at the center of it, it'll be great. But you probably also have to have other characters just because in MIL sci-fi, if you write first person, it's just one character and you're gonna have a hard time pulling off the radio operator or the radar operator is that one
Right.
character.
And we may get into that when we are going to talk more about plotting, but what a character can see kind of dictates parts of the plot they can
Mhm.
interact with, right? So hey, we would love to hear about niche characters that you would love to see more of that maybe we haven't thought of. So, we've talked about mechanics, radio operators. I love medics. So I don't know, let us know what you think either in the Facebook group or the Discord. There'll be links to both down below. And thank you for
If
hanging
you're
out.
in any branch of the military and you're like, hey, I did this thing, let us know. It'd be interesting because I've got like cooks, mechanics, engineers, medics, doctors, radio operators, radar operators, pilots. I mean, the whole gamut in the Navy for Grimm's War. And I have my own blinders on when it comes to writing. So there's entirely possible I have missed things. So,
Right.
let us know. It'd be great. And then when we put it in the book, you can be like, oh, that was my idea. But I can't give you credit for it though, because copyright.
It's my idea. It only came from me.
I don't read fan fiction.
Yep. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you next time. Take it easy.
Adios.